constant statistic that I hear from private equity firms is that most of them have a success rate on CXO hires of anywhere between 20 and 30%, and 30 is quite rare.
Let's face it, I buy 23 companies and put them together, and I've got 23 entrepreneurs who are now all rich because I gave them a wheelbarrow full of gold.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Raw Selection Private Equity Podcast. Happy to welcome back a previous guest of Adam Coffey. Adam is here to talk about his experience of scaling businesses, but this time focused on building the correct culture and hiring the right talent. So, no further ado with Adam's introduction, let's dive in. Adam Coffey, welcome back yet again to the Private Equity Podcast, the most viewed YouTube podcast we have here at the Private Equity Podcast. So welcome back. Let's do a refresh. It's been a while since you've been on. Give us a brief insight into you, if you can even keep that brief, Adam, with everything you've done.
Alex, it's good to see you again. This is the fourth time. I think it's the fourth time I've been. So let's go for a new record. This one's going to be the most listened to podcast ever. How's that? So that's my goal for today. It's good to see you. So for those out there who don't know me, some things about me: veteran U.S. Army. It's up there somewhere. Military taught me something about discipline, teamwork, leadership. I'm an engineer. Engineering made me a meticulous planner. I'm a pilot. Pilots don't take off unless we know where we're going, and then we reverse engineer the trip. Really useful skill for being a private equity portfolio company CEO. I spent 10 years at GE during the Jack Welch era. Tech doesn't exist. Jack's the world's most admired CEO. That company, number one on the Fortune 500 list. It's growing so fast, it's doubling in size every 2.8 years. That's where I learned how to run a business. I then spent 21 years building 3 international companies for 9 different private equity sponsors, buy and builds, turnarounds all, bought 58 companies, fixed the base business, bought 58 companies, sprinkled them on top. And I have $2.5 billion in exits as a CEO. And then I got bored. I just turned 60. I was in Cancun. I rode Hurricane Barrel for my 60th birthday. It was a lot of fun. Actually, I couldn't have ordered a better vacation, than that. So turned 60 and I decided, I got 10 years left in my career. I want to spend the next 10 years helping as many entrepreneurs find success as I can. And instead of just running one company, which I was frankly bored doing, I want to help a bunch of people improve their companies and teach them some of the tricks of the trade. So I started a consulting business. I still work with private equity firms. I help them evaluate investments. I mentor their leadership teams, et cetera. I work with 71 founder-led companies right now and having a blast. I work more hours today than I did as a CEO. And I'm still teaching, writing books, and teaching seminars globally, having a lot of fun doing that. I actually work more today than I did when I was a CEO. I didn't think it was possible, Alex, but that's it. That's me.
Well, it just shows when you're a CEO, Adam, you're just lazy. Now you're really playing it. Now you've hit 60. So let's dive in. One of my favorite topics is talent, but we're going to dive into first culture. So you've seen all sorts of different cultural businesses. You've seen businesses grow from tens of millions to hundreds of millions to billions. And you've seen that transition both in a private equity-backed environment and a world-class G environment, as well as the military and other bits and pieces. So just talk to us about how you begin to evaluate a culture, how you begin to understand it, because it's something that's used by exec search firms and overplayed, I think, with regards to their understanding, whereas the actual importance of it, I think, is critical.
Yeah, you know what? If we're going to build a really big company, and if we want a company to grow fast, we're going to need a lot of people. I mean, let's face it. And, I think about if I take my last company, my last empire, when I walked in the door, there was over 1,000 employees. By the time I walked out of the door 5 years later, and 2 PE firms later, there was over 3,000 employees, in just a very short period of time, from 1,000 to 3,000. In today's world, it is just hard to find people who want to even work anymore. Everybody wants to be a TikTok multi-millionaire and be a social media influencer. Nobody wants to work. If you're going to build an empire, it starts with culture. It starts with culture because the people we've got, we want them to stay. the people that we're going to need when we're growing fast, but we've got to be able to attract them and get them to stay. I remember my last company too, when I first got there, the turnover rate, I'm looking at basic metrics on the company, 41% turnover in employees. I'm like, how the heck am I supposed to grow a big world-class service company if 40% of my workforce is walking out the door every year? It's like unheard of, to me. So that's indicative of a bad culture, a toxic culture. Something's got to be wrong when your company is losing people that fast. There are some industries that are different, I can think of a security guard type company that might have a 90% turnover of employees every year, but that's because these jobs were transitional to begin with. My case, I'm looking for people to spend a career, and at 41% turnover, that's unsustainable. So culture is the cornerstone that lets us keep good people. Growth allows for those people to find promotional opportunities if they seek them. But as we're building these empires, we get bigger. As we get bigger, we become more complex. As we become more complex, there's going to be plenty of times where we have to go out and attract new talent, and that's where people like you come in. It's like, hey, I'll give you a great example. I had just sold my last company for a ton of money, really good return on investment, for shareholders. And as I'm planning then the next 5-year hold period, I'm looking at the key positions in the company, and we identified 23 key positions that were going to help us grow from where we were, which was an enterprise value of north of 500 million, to an enterprise value of about 3 billion. And guess what? My company just won the championship. We just sold, we spiked the ball, we made a bunch of money. Now I'm looking at 23 new people who are going to help me go to the next level. 9 of those positions were empty. They were new positions that didn't even exist in the company during the last 5-year hold period with a private equity firm. These were new jobs. So, I constantly, a strong culture helps me attract talent, keep talent, so that as I'm growing, I'm not replacing bodies. I'm adding new people on top of the talent that I've already got. Promotional opportunities are created by the growth of the organization, but even with that, I still need external talent to come into the organization. So, it starts with culture, because when we're recruiting, let's face it, in today's world, people care about culture. People care, and they can detect very quickly when an employer is paying lip service to culture versus they truly believe in people and culture and taking care of employees, and this doesn't mean coddling employees. We hold people accountable, but people care about culture. Culture matters. They want to know why I'm here. What does this company believe in? Does it align with my own personal values? Let's face it, the workforce is changing, and post-COVID, most people didn't want to go back to the office, at least not full time. And so a lot of hybrid work environments being created. So, culture is king. People and human talent is key to success and growing a business. And as we're growing and getting more complex, new types of people are needed and new positions are created. Talent is the key to everything.
So you mentioned the 41% turnover of people. How did you go about tackling that to get that down?
In the first 12 months that I was at that company, we wanted to understand why. And so it started by talking to employees to try to figure out what the key nuances were. And guess what? They were different in every part of the country. So in the Pacific Northwest in the U.S., we had heavy union competition. And it was a straight up wage issue. We were not competitive in the marketplace. We had great benefits, and so did the union, but our wage scales were not competitive in the Pacific Northwest. So there we had to make investments. We had to change the pay structures. But I remember in Texas, as an example, the problem there wasn't pay scale. We were fine from a pay scale perspective. The irritant there had to do with this little obscure benefit. So the company was headquartered in California, and in the state of California, employers, it was mandated that employees build up sick time. And so they're accruing sick time as a part of just their normal employment. And, if they get sick, they have sick days that they can cash in, they can still get paid. Well, that company before I got there was following state law, but it wasn't, if the state of Texas did not require that benefit, then the company wasn't giving it to employees in Texas. And when employees would go for training, they're meeting with their brethren who are employees from California and Texas and other parts of the country. And of course, at night, over a beer, they're going over their benefits and what they think about working here, and they're finding out that benefits are different in different parts of the country. And the guys in Texas were pissed off because the guys in California were getting sick time and they weren't. And so I immediately adopted just a provision of whatever we're giving as benefits is not going to be based upon what state law requires. It's going to be the same across the entire empire. So if one state requires it, then by God, all states are going to grant it, whether the state required it or not. And so, truly, it's like we looked at what the irritants were. They were different. We created a plan to address those irritants. And frankly, some of it cost us money, required us to invest in our people. But I'm here to lead change. I'm here to lead massive growth. It starts with people. And so I'm showing these people that I'm committed to them, that I'm not just giving lip service to these issues. I'm actually changing them. And then from that base, I'm starting to get buy-in. Okay, this dude's different. He's hearing us and he's doing something about it. Now, when I come back later on and I'm changing things, that I'm coming at it from a credible position. Hey, he made investments. I saw them. Now, when he's doing a restructure, he's not doing it just to save a buck. He's doing it because there's a rationale behind it. So it started with me being completely transparent, talking about the issues, learning from the employees in the different parts of the country, what was driving these issues, and then actually taking the steps to fix them. And in doing that, literally employee turnover went from like 41% to the teens almost overnight. Within 12 months, we had we'd cut that in half. What I didn't know coming in was that trades-based businesses, electricians, plumbers, HVAC people, companies that have trades-based workforces actually have really high turnover because there's a shortage of them. People are throwing money at, hey, come work for me. I'll give you a raise. I'll give you a new truck. I'll give you new tools. And so normal turnover was about 30%. I didn't know that, and I don't accept that. So I take care of my employees. I want to have the best benefits in the industry. I care about culture because I used to be the guy in the truck. So I make significant investments and changes, and that got me to more than 10 points below the industry average, in less than 12 months from a position that was 10% higher than the industry average to start from. And so, I believe in doing the analysis and taking action. Mind you, my goal is growth, not just in revenue, but in earnings. So I have to be smart about investments that I make. But I find that being a transparent leader in talking to people kind of sets the stage for letting me do that. And then making visible investments early in my arrival buys me the credibility. The transparency establishes the dialogue. And then as the company's growing, I'm coming at it from a position of extreme credibility. People start recommending the company to their friends. They're out drinking. They're no longer talking smack about their boss or their company. They're now saying good things about their company. They're staying. They're recruiting their friends to come, and that starts to help solve that person, that people dynamic that growth can sometimes create, especially in today's world where people really don't want to work.
So I'm going to come back to that reference of people don't want to work. But before we do that, talking about that transition of culture. Now, a lot of private equity firms really struggle with the transition from a founder-owned lifestyle company, and you made lots of acquisitions of those type businesses, to a P-backed environment of fast growth, process, systems, accountability. How did you come with, what's your kind of playbook around making that kind of level of change?
Well, so for the typical, so my typical companies that I bought, call it the 58 companies that I bought, founder led and maybe 20 to 50 employees, small workforce. But in reality, if you're an employee working for a small employer, you have limited upside potential. There may be one service manager in the company, and the service manager's last name is the same as the founder's last name. And you know what? Unless your name magically changes, you're never going to get that job. And that person's in their 30s and you're in your 40s, and you're like, they're not going to retire out of that job before I do. And so I have very limited opportunity for personal growth when I'm working in a small company. So what I would do is, when I'm preparing to make my messaging and my day one welcome to the company, I'm very mindful of call it some of the issues that typical employees have in a family-owned small business type environment. And so I can address what the positive aspects are of joining a larger organization. Hey, we have promotional opportunities. Have you ever thought about becoming, a branch manager? I have 80 offices around the country, not one. If you wanted to move across country because your family is from somewhere else, your wife wants you to go there, or she wants, her husband to come here. It's like, I have openings all over the country. And as we're growing, I've got promotional opportunities for those who seek management positions. And so a large company affords you with these kinds of personal growth opportunities. And for those of you who want to stay in the truck in this town for the rest of your career, God bless you. We need you. And so I created actual roadmaps. So here are the career paths that are now available to you within this larger company. So I didn't have a lot of, people were always nervous when we announced an acquisition. It's like, oh my God, is my job secure? But we worked really hard to diffuse their worry by talking about the benefits of becoming a part of a bigger organization. And I can tell you that in all the companies that I bought, I had a negative synergy every time because my benefits were richer than the companies that I'm buying. So the first exposure an employee was getting to me was a positive. I'm not talking to them about how I'm cutting their benefits. I'm talking to them about how they get better benefits by joining my team, and how they now have career and promotional opportunities. So very quickly, we could win the trust of new employees coming in. Matter of fact, we used to survey and look at employee engagement scores and things like that. And what we found was that recently acquired companies and employees actually had higher engagement and higher positive scores than employees who had been in the organization for 20 years, because the people who'd been there for a long time forget what the industry norm truly is. New people coming in see the positive aspects of joining, and their actually engagement scores were higher. So to keep the former owners engaged, I made them roll over investors and shareholders in the bigger company. And it was a significant enough size to where they had to care, because they still had significant money invested, and the hope for then significant returns would keep them on my reservation, call it. So I think some of those keys were, it wasn't just I was making investments in people, but I was doing it to become kind of a beacon that I could then sell when I'm buying companies and those employees are joining. It's like, oh, I'm nervous, but guess what? My benefits are better, and hey, I've now got promotional opportunities. And there were a lot of positives in joining the bigger company. And so we were able to pull it off without wholesale, changes to the cultures of these companies. We were building on those cultures.
To protect investors from bad hires for your portfolio company, I've collated into a brand new book some of the top tips and processes investors use to ensure they do not hire those bad hires into their portfolio companies. We are giving the book for free for the first 100 people that join the waiting list. So please check out the show notes and get your name down for a free copy. Nice. So you mentioned the term people don't want to work. There's a real shift in the world probably since COVID of work from home type scenario. and everybody's flexible and a lot of pressure. And we've seen a lot of the large Amazon businesses and everything, other companies transition back now from work from home type policies to Elon Musk has done it. Obviously, Jeff Bezos doesn't lead Amazon in its pure entirety anymore, but there's certainly that transition back. What kind of conversations are you having with the founders, owners, private equity backed executives around kind of tackling, this?
Well, Alex, I'll even go one further than just talking about that phenomenon, but also talk about how it impacts me from a recruiting standpoint. When I'm trying to build a senior executive team and I limit it to a specific geography, what I was finding was that nobody wants to move and relocate anymore. So if I'm a Southern California-based company, where I'm in one section of the UK and I'm looking for talent, getting someone to pack up and move their family is something that I'm finding a lot of resistance in doing. And so if I have to recruit only in one geography, I'm very limited potentially to what the talent pool is in that geography. But if I think about, okay, I'm a national company, why would I require people to sit at a headquarters when I've got people all over the country? What I want is, and so I can increase my ability to recruit the best people by being more flexible about where that talent has to reside. And so I actually found this aspect to be a positive because I could attract a much broader talent pool from which I could pick the best people. So my last company, I moved from Southern California, where the headquarters was, to Dallas. I'm in Dallas. My CHRO is sitting in California with my head of sales, but my COO was in Virginia, and my tech leader, my CTO was in Denver, and my CFO was in Florida. And it's like, I could hire really good people. And guess what? Instead of people flying all over the country, Dallas was about a 2-hour flight for everybody. So let's start meeting in Dallas so I can pull all this horsepower together. And so I actually find that there's a broader talent pool if I don't think geographically centered. And I think COVID, if there was one good thing that came out of COVID, it was that it forced all of us to go work at home. How are we going to pull this off? I remember when COVID first was starting to hit, I was seeing countries shut down in other parts of the world that hadn't really hit the U.S. quite yet. And I'm like immediately in triage mode, working with IT. Look, if we had to shut down, could we work from home? And we had to immediately order hundreds of laptops. There were certain things we had to do to our infrastructure in order to get prepped. Good thing we did, because within a matter of about 90 days, we were shut down and we were working from home. And so I understand in some aspects companies who are wanting to pull people back in, but I like a hybrid type environment. If I can be flexible with employees to some level, then they need to be flexible too, because there may be a good business reason why I need the collaboration and I need people to come back to a physical location. But just think about how you used to design a workspace. It used to be private offices assigned to people, cubicles assigned to people. Well, in a new hybrid kind of environment, I need a lot of hoteling space, and people may be coming in, and I need the collaboration space and less assigned office space. Footprints could get smaller or change radically. But I understand when there is a physical need. I had that at some degree. So one of my divisions was an engineering division, and I had different engineers with different skill sets that were kind of working in pods. And so when they were designing MEPR, it was mechanical, electrical, plumbing, refrigeration, there were 3 or 4 engineers working on one project. Well, it was very difficult to collaborate from home. They needed to be physically in front of prints and talking over the fence, to each other. Well, what if I did this? Well, then I could do that, and there was a collaborative need that required us to pull the engineers back into the office. But for people where we could be flexible, we remained flexible. And I think for a lot of workers, it was like, boy, I got used to that flexibility. So if my employer is not going to afford that opportunity, there are other companies I could go work for that will, And so I think to the extent that you can be flexible, we need to be flexible. But boy, has the landscape changed, in a very short period of time, and we went from one extreme, which is almost nobody working from home, to everyone working at home, to some kind of a hybrid model. And, that was one, I think, positive aspect for employees. Maybe not employers, but you got to learn how to hold people accountable, and you got to learn how to know that people are being productive at home. And I think for a lot of people or employers, the angst or anxiety was around, well, how do I know they're paying attention and doing what they're supposed to be doing? Well, there's other ways that I could verify that. If I have an ERP system and someone's job requires them to be logged in all day, I can see when they're, after 10 minutes of inactivity, they've logged out, and they're logging out 30 times a day. They're supposed to be in there all day doing something. I can look at productivity measures, this department, these jobs have this kind of productivity. Here's a person that's running much lower. Then it's like I can still call it the proverbial person that's mailing it in or isn't engaged or isn't working hard. And I can engage with them and try to find out, hey, what's going on? Is there an issue? Is there a problem at home that I can help with? And so I can do it in a helpful way, but I can still hold people accountable. So I would say, I hope the world never goes back to 100% of us going back to an office. I've spent the last 3 years now working from home. I'm working more hours than I ever did. I can't mail it in because I'm a solopreneur. It's like, if I mail it in, I don't make any money. So I have to be conscious of that. So I like and think that was the one positive aspect of COVID, was it taught us how to think differently about employers and talent. And I love it if I can get away from the paradigm of, I need to sit in an office. And as a leadership team, when I'm running a national or international company, I want to be able to recruit talent from a biggest pool as possible so that I can get the best people to come work for me.
You spoke about the hiring talent process. So we changed the culture, we've improved that. When it comes to talent, obviously my favorite subject. What was your process, and what advice do you have for people, executives, with regards to, or private equity investors, on building out that executive team, getting the right people? Because a constant statistic that I hear from private equity firms is that most of them have a success rate on CXO hires of anywhere between 20 and 30%, and 30 is quite rare. So what was your process with regards to building out your exec team that enabled you to scale to that $1 billion?
So anybody who's read any of my books knows I'm a fan of a guy out there named Sandy Ogg, and a system, talent to value type framework. The more I can write the specific job specification and relate it to work experience and talent, and previous jobs that would be indicators of success, the much higher success rate that I'm going to have. And so when Sandy was an operating partner at Blackstone, they were having that same problem too. And Sandy brought a different framework to mind. It's like, let's consider the work to be done. So I'm a company this size. I'm going to this size. Who are the 20 or 30 people, a lot of these 3,000, that are actually going to make value happen over the hold period? What are those key jobs? Are there any that we need to hire to get the right team on the field? And I think about, what's the specific work to be done? So I'll give you an example to illustrate the point. If I needed a new VP of sales and I had two candidates, one, both of them took a company from 1 billion to 6 billion in size, over a period of time. One came from Salesforce, and Salesforce was leading, the guy was leading the sales effort, and Salesforce was growing like a weed because everyone was tired of Siebel and they needed a new solution. And so the world was going, CRM, sales, Salesforce was the sexy new product. People were buying it, regardless. You could have put a donkey in as VP of sales and you'd have had the growth that Salesforce had. Sorry to say that. And then on another side, I have a candidate, and that candidate was working in a pest control company that was a PE-backed buy and build, and they went from $1 billion in revenue to $6 billion in revenue, and they led a sales effort while we were constantly adding companies, acquiring 100 companies a year, and different sales cultures that were constantly having to be melded together, and the process blown up and rebuilt because the company's going through so many phases of growth. And that person, pest control, happened to sell to grocery stores. I'm running a grocery store roll-up, and guess what? The person that buys refrigeration service is the same person that buys pest control services. That was a bonus. But I'm doing a buy and build, and I'm buying a bunch of companies and putting them together, and I'm blowing up, the legacy sales practices, and it's chaos, and there's all these different cultures that are coming together. And now I look at my two candidates through that lens, and it's like clearly one fits better than the other. But without a framework, or considering the exact work that's being done in my organization that I'm hiring for, I might have just said, well, geez, who wouldn't want that Salesforce executive that oversaw $1 billion to $6 billion? But that wasn't a buy and build, and that wasn't a rebuilding of multiple sales cultures. That was a hot new software product that everyone gravitated towards, and it was a different sales process than the other, which was actually a better direct fit. And so when we think about specific work to be done, what are the skills? Now when I think about my candidate, I could give my recruiter, if it's you, I could write a tighter spec. This is the background that I think my successful candidate needs to have. Now when I'm interviewing, I'm not just looking at people who've been successful, gone from size X to Y, but now I'm looking at what was the specific work and experience that they got in these different jobs that they've held, and what would be indicative of a better fit and a higher probability of success rate. And so Sandy's, in Sandy's framework, they went from under 50%, good hire to better than 80% good hire rate. Still can make mistakes. People can give good interview or just dial out or check out, but the probability factor went up tremendously. So I think it starts with really understanding the job spec, and what is the specific work that's going to be done, using that to assess the backgrounds of candidates and to think about who's going to be successful given their background experience. They're both great people, but which one fits better, is a better fit for the organization, the actual work that I'm doing here. So that's one other little tidbit I'll give people. I don't hire for the company I have today. I hire for the company I aspire to be tomorrow. And generally I'm looking 5 years ahead. And so if I'm a stagnant company that isn't growing, I can hire for the company I am today and I'm going to be fine. But if I'm growing like this and I hire for the company I am today, then very quickly I'm going to outgrow the talent potentially that I just brought into the organization. And so I like to hire for the company I aspire to be. So that way for at least a few years, I'll call it the first 5 years, this person's fighting below their weight class as I'm catching up to them. They know what big looks like. They can help me manage through the chaos of growth. And then as I get up to them, now I can start pushing them to new heights because, the company has outgrown where they're at. And if I think of it in that time frame, I usually think about, what do I aspire to be in 5 years if I'm a growth company? Then talent's going to last with me for probably at least a good 10 years, or has the potential to. And they may last the entire time. But there were plenty of times in my career where I just won a championship, sold a company, and then I had to let some people go because the next journey ahead was going to take people to places they had never seen, did not have the capability to stay with. And so I had to selectively upgrade talent, along the way in order to keep my team relevant for the journey ahead. And sometimes owners would think that of me. I need to have a different CEO come in because this is uncharted territory for my current CEO. And so, it's like, that's how I think about it. I think about aligning work to be done with experience the candidate has. I think about hiring, for the company I aspire to be, not the company that I am today. So that way the talent can stay with me longer on my growth journey. Those are kind of my tips.
Not only am I the host of the Private Equity Podcast, but I'm also the founder and managing partner of Raw Selection. Raw Selection is a private equity specialist executive search firm with two divisions, one that focuses on portfolio C-suite executive hires and one that focuses on private equity direct hires via back office and investment deal professionals, operating across Europe and North America. A unique offering of our service is that we offer a full money-back guarantee on all upfront deposits. We typically take around $10,000 as an upfront deposit to commence a search process. The remainder is then on completion, but that upfront deposit is completely refundable. If you're not happy with our service, we'll refund that upfront deposit, no questions asked. How did you assess talent? So we talk about that experience focus. How did you bring into play the I'm going to reference culture, but their attitude, their hard work ethic? How did you kind of unearth that element? Because it's clearly an important part of any exec.
Yeah. So as a part of, call it the assessing of the talent and the candidates, many employers would run some type of a psychological profile or add some add-on services to your base service of just recruiting to also do profiles. Let's do an assessment of the current leadership team, understand the dynamics of what we've got. Let's assess our finalists and see how they are going to fit potentially into that culture. Some people would use science for that. I try to read culture in people as a part of my interview process. And so I may have someone who has all the skills I'm looking for, but they're going to be a bull in a china shop in my culture. And so that's a fatal flaw I can't overcome, and so the kinds of companies that I ran, which were services environments, my product is intangible. You can't store service in a box and put it on a shelf. My product's people. If I bring someone in that's going to be toxic to my environment, then that's detrimental to the vision and to what I'm trying to create. I'm going to remove that person. Toxicity just doesn't work. Even when I'm buying companies, I may find the perfect acquisition, but let's face it, I buy 23 companies and put them together, and I've got 23 entrepreneurs who are now all rich because I gave them a wheelbarrow full of gold. And if I get one bad apple in my corral, because none of these people had bosses before, now they work for me, and I got to get them all singing Kumbaya around the fire and pointed in the same direction. It's hard enough already. Put one bad apple in my corral, and it can completely destroy what I've worked so hard to build. So the culture didn't go away. It's still there, and it needs to be accounted for. And so it's just an added element. So I've got the person, their background, how it aligns with my job and the work to be done, and are they a cultural fit is just a natural part of that.
Seems like a simple question, but how did you identify that somebody wasn't right? What steps did you take in order to turn them around? And how quickly did you come to the conclusion that it's probably shake hands time and let them find something better?
It's a great question. And I tend to be one of those rehabilitators. So I see the glass as half full. I want to invest in people. I want to give them time. I want to try to triage what's not working and nurse it along. And so usually I would walk into a company and I would tell my HR leader, this is my flaw, and I need you to be, my little voice, that whispers in my ear. You can't fix this. You need to take action. You need to be more forceful. So what I try to develop in the culture is a means of constantly identifying talent and nurturing it and, getting it leadership training and what it has. So I can try to avoid the need for the turnover in the first place, or just be cultivating so that as my up and coming talent is, getting an MBA, is going to leadership training or management training, as I create new executive positions, I've got a bench to draw from. That's a piece of this. But, at the same time, I was in a room one time with a couple hundred CEOs, and the question on the table was, when is the right time to take action on a person? And we debated it for like an hour, everyone yelling back and forth, and this is what I think and why, and this is what I think and why. By the time we were all done, you got like a couple thousand years worth of management experience sitting in the room. The ultimate decision that came out of that was, when's the right time to replace a person? it's when you first think that that person might not make it, because every day thereafter, you're wasting time and energy trying to fix something that's broken, and you're taking your eye off of the ball, of the growth, or the trajectory or what you're doing. So the cultivated wisdom of all these CEOs was, when's the right time to replace? It's the first time you think you might have to replace, because everything after that point is an exercise in futility, and the ability to rehabilitate and get someone to be a star performer when you're questioning whether they should be in the company. That journey is so hard that the disproportionate amount of people are going to fail that. So if you think it might need to be done, that's probably the time to call Alex.
I appreciate that. But look, most people would say, of course, I agree with that. I would just say to any private equity firms, this has regularly been said on the podcast by various different individuals, nobody regrets letting somebody go. I've never had somebody go, yeah, we should have done X, Y, and Z. It's always, we should have done that sooner, and we should have had that and made that change. And
so the sooner part comes from I want to rehabilitate it. I want to work with it. I'm going to take the time to try to evaluate it.
Yeah.
When I would come into a company, I would say, everyone earned, I don't bring a team. I come in and I've got probably 6 months in a 5-year hold period. I have probably 6 months to evaluate the talent I've got on the bus and what seats they're sitting in. And I need to then have a framework that says, these are the people that are going to make it, or have a higher probability of making it. These are the people that need to be replaced immediately. And these are the people that are on the bubble, where I'm going to have to watch it a little bit closer. Meanwhile, here's the empty seats on the bus that I'm going to need because of the growth, path that I'm undertaking. And so, I think, the more we wait to take action, the higher probability we're disappointed in the outcome from trying to not just rehabilitate, but then if I'm a PE firm, the hold period in general. If I take too long to make calls early, I don't have enough time for the new team on the field to impact the score of the game while my 5-year hold period is playing out. So talent has to be addressed quickly.
I completely agree with that. So, Adam, anybody watching on the YouTube channel will see that you have now 4, so you might see a 5th book on there, but I know you've written 4 on there. You've got a new book out, so appreciate you coming and sharing all this value and coming on for the 4th time on the podcast. So please do tell everyone about your new book or your upgraded version of your old book, I think.
Yes, so this is my off year, so I'm committed to doing a book every 2 years, and so Empire Builder, which, by the way, is my favorite of all of my books, is Empire Builder. I put that out last year. This was supposed to be my year of rest, my off year, and I decided, the Private Equity Playbook, which literally, I wrote it in 2018, it came out in 2019, and it literally has never left the top 5 in the category of private equity in the last 5 years, some form, whether it's the audio book, the Kindle, or the hardcover, or the paperback, it's always in the top. And I decided, after 5 years, I've learned, continue to evolve. This was pre-COVID when I wrote the first edition. So I decided, let's write a second edition. Let's update it. Let's expand the content. I've learned new things, and let's update the numbers. And so, I decided it was time to do it. Funny part is that both books are now, call it in the top 10. And it's like people are finding value, I guess, differently in each of them, and so they're both out there. But, I decided it was time to update. And so next year will be new book, full new book. This one was an updated version of the Private Equity Playbook, which is mandatory reading in a lot of colleges and universities in their executive MBA programs. It's mandatory reading in a lot of private equity firms for income.
Mandatory reading in our firm. So I'm not just saying that. I would show you our copy, but people have them, so I don't have any. But look, I don't know, when we plug things and it feels like a bit of a sell. Guys, learning and development's the biggest and most important part. You've got a guy sat in front of us who's sharing his valuable time when he's done growing a business from tens of millions to 100 millions to a billion, and he's prepared to come on. So if you want to buy the book, buy the book. If you don't, but don't complain about it, is my...
I donate the royalties to charity, Alex, so it makes absolutely zero difference in my life, but it does fuel my philanthropic work. So
Adam, if anybody wants to reach out post this, I know you're a busy guy, so probably your inbox gets hammered, but how do people get in touch with you if they wish to do so?
LinkedIn. There's 830 million business people on LinkedIn globally. That's where all my clients are. That's where my world is. You'll find me on LinkedIn. There are fake Adam Coffeys on Facebook and Instagram. I kid you not. I think you've arrived when there's people doing fake profiles and trying to monetize people by tricking them into thinking, they're really talking to me. You're going to find me on LinkedIn. And I don't have a mob of people who are in my social media accounts. I answer everybody who reaches out to me. As long as you're not trying to sell me something, if you're a real human who's talking about my books or, about business in general, I respond to every person. I get up early in the morning and I do that almost first thing. Make a cup of coffee, look at my inbox on LinkedIn, and I start engaging with people. So that's where you find me.
Perfect. Well, Adam, thank you very much for coming on for a record 4th time, sharing all your insights and all your experiences of everything you've done in your career. So thank you very much for that and coming on again.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for listening, everybody.
And as always, thank you very much for tuning in yet again to the Private Equity Podcast. Till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.